I asked Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger his definition of voter suppression. Here's what he said.
Well, that's an interesting question, I guess. You have to go back to somewhere in the 60s when, things changed for the better. We had poll taxes in place. Yeah. It just very difficult. I know that then you also had ballot stuffing that happened.
Mm-hmm.
I read all about Jimmy Carter and the first time, and obviously that case was different, but, they both were running in a primary, and that's really why, President Carter has led on making sure that everyone is allowed to vote. That's been one of the forefronts of the Carter Presidential Library and what he's been all about.
Your reaction to that?
This is a great example of Georgia elections officials in the great mentorship of Brian Kemp that he's provided to these guys. They have no coherent answer to your question there, Rose. He just muddled together something about somewhere in the 60s we dealt with this, and then something about poll taxes, then somewhere about Jimmy Carter. This is the chief elections officer of the state of Georgia, who is currently in federal court over the very constitutionality of his system. And he's giving you this flippant response. I think it's egregious that he doesn't have an answer to black voters, to naturalized citizens in the state, to young voters. The tens of thousands of folks who were given provisional ballots, who called our voter protection hotline, who to this day, voter suppression is cumulative, right? A mother goes in and has a problem voting, has a confusing experience, is given a provisional ballot, isn't sure if it's counted or not, then goes back into the car with her child, and they have a conversation, and now the child is hearing about these problems. This is a history in this state, and our state leaders need to step up and do a lot better. That is embarrassing, and he also knows the truth here, which is that under Brian Kemp's leadership in the Secretary of State's office, after the Supreme Court declared in 2013 that there was no racial discrimination in elections and previous voting rights states.
They gutted the Voting Rights Act.
Yep, racism is over in electoral and in elections in the South. And there were none southern jurisdictions covered by the Voting Rights Act. But let's be clear. Before 2013 in Georgia, elections administrators at the local and state level had to pre-clear elections changes with the federal Department of Justice. In 2013, when the Supreme Court ruled in Shelby versus Holder, that was no longer the case. What we know is a fact, and this is third-party groups. This is not Fair Fight Action. This is the Brennan Center. It's all sorts of national groups have looked at this, that Brian Kemp, as Secretary of State, was the most aggressive at change in election policy and law in a way that discriminated against racial and ethnic minorities in the state of Georgia. And here's Brad Raffensperger coming on your show, his successor, with almost exactly the same staff and legal team at the Secretary of State's office, cannot give you a response on voter suppression. Folks should be outraged, and we certainly are.